morning, good afternoon, from whichever part of the country that you're joining the second session of the Media and Journalism webinars. Today in our agenda, we have storytelling and the power of media to reveal the truth. And we have fascinating speakers from Norway and South Africa. We're going to be talking about these distinguished media members, journalists, producers' work, A Gift from God and the Homeland documentary. But in between, we will surely receive their feedbacks, insights on some of the strategies that they took along the way to work on these two different areas, democracy, human rights, and the refugee crisis, and surely the power of social media or the human rights documentaries, short films to raise awareness about what's going on in the world. So to give it a start, we have Jorgen Lorenson with us. He's a producer at Integral Film. He's a journalist, professor of gender studies at the University of Oslo as well. And he produced more than 15 films, including the documentary film Kayoyo that was shortlisted for an Oscar at the 90th Academy Awards back in 2018. And he recently worked on a outstanding documentary, Political and Human Rights Crackdown of Turkey, was on the spot for this production, which we will dive into discussion quite shortly. And we also have two other wonderful speakers on board today who's going to share their expertise in documentary filmmaking, Firdoze, Bulbulia, and Faith Isiakpere from South Africa. So Firdoze, thank you so much for joining us. She is the chairperson of the Children and Broadcasting Foundation for Africa, an international trainer, producer, creating media solutions, particularly for women and children's rights, their empowerment. She is also a co-founder of ABC, Africa's best channel, a children and youth television channel in Nigeria. And she also did produce dozens of films and feature-length documentaries. Lastly, we will hear from Faith Isiakpere, who has worked in various international media platforms, many broadcasters, including Temas TV, Channel 4, Central TV, and was the senior producer for the BBC as well. And he mainly works in the areas of immigration, produced and directed many documentaries, dramas, music videos. So he's a globally renowned filmmaker and producer. So this is a great chance, everybody in the room, to start sharing your feedbacks, comments. Just as a very quick snapshot, Jorgen, Firdoze, and Faith, we talked about the role of media and press freedom for democracy and human rights in our session 1. And we have participants from over 20 countries. So the discussion in the room was quite vibrant, having everybody's feedbacks and regional representations. So I believe we will keep up the same spirit today as well. So Jorgen, let's start with you, and I will shortly present the trailer as well. Going over the Integral Films website, I saw your motto, magic in words and visions. I think this is very much relevant to our discussion today as well, and we will definitely get use of this vibrant motto as well. So as I mentioned, your recent, it's been a couple years already, but first of all, again, congratulations on this wonderful production, A Gift from God. We all already shared the link, but right before we dive into our discussion, I would like to share my screen, and let's first watch the trailer, and I'll post my first question to you.
Adli tıptan bu şekilde linç edilmiş halde adli tıptan aldım. Ben oğlumu bu şekilde teslim etmedim.
4 tanesini öldürdük. 4'ünü öldürdük. O 5'inci geldi.
Kuppforsøket i Tyrkia har gitt president Erdogan nærmest all makt.
Türkiye'nin gittiği yön bir diktatörlüktür. Dinci bir diktatörlüktür. İslamik bir diktatörlüktür. Faşizan bir diktatörlüktür.
He is the new red line. You cannot say anything against him. I mean, what are you going to do? If they want to arrest you, they'll arrest you, basically.
Allerede samme natt som kuppforsøket utspilte seg, ble mange tusen mennesker arrestert.
Ama geri dönerken ya yakalanacak mıyım, tutuklanacak mıyım? Çünkü herhangi hatalı bir şey yapmadım. Tamamen bir sivil soykırım nesnesi.
Hvordan var det mulig å begynne å arrestere folk så fort?
They have a list, a long list, and it's a purge process.
This is not the way you do a coup, so we all knew that this was a little bit fishy from the beginning.
I 3 år har vi jobbet intenst for å prøve å forstå hva som egentlig skjedde.
Dolayısıyla Allah'ın lütfu derken kendisi için tarihsel bir fırsatın ortaya çıktığını gördü ve bunu gerçekleştirdi zaten.
Nå skal jeg fortelle en annen historie.
So when did your documentary producing career started, and what do you think on the impactful role of storytelling to raise awareness of the human rights crisis? This particular document is perfectly capturing the recent, since the last decade, various forms of human rights violations do surely occur in Turkey right after the failed coup attempt. And in this production, you engaged in meaningful discussions with various of very primary dissident journalists, the people who do have a critical voice in Turkey, Nevşin Mengü, Can Ataklı. And indeed, that would be great. It's a recent development, but one of the journalists that you have interviewed with, Merdan, he is now jailed, and you spoke with many other dissidents' families as well. So please, go ahead, let's hear from your journey on how your interest started in Turkey, how you started working in documentary making for human rights crisis, and a little bit more in-depth information about A Gift from God.
Let me first say that Merdan Yanardağ, that was the first journalist that we interviewed on this pilot or trailer you see here. He was arrested only 2 days ago. He has been a very, very important and critical journalist in Turkey for a long time. And you can say that in a way, I'm quite surprised that he hasn't been in prison before, that he has been able to criticize Erdogan and the regime for years and years. But the fact that he was now arrested only a couple of days ago shows us that what is happening and has happened in Turkey the last 10 years is worsening after he won the election in May this year. Now he is arresting more journalists, a new journalist that he has never touched before. And the development of Turkey is not really good. I made this document because in a way I had to. I was there in July, 15th of July 2016, and experienced this coup attempt on very close hold. I was there because my wife is Turkish, and we have been in Turkey for the last 20 years many times. We have been living there periodically, know a lot of people, know a lot of journalists. I've been involved in PEN International and been going to trials for journalists and others that have been imprisoned and taken there for the last 20 years. So I've been quite involved in the political situation and know a lot about the situation in Turkey. And when this coup attempt happened, I was sitting with my family, with my large Turkish family, and we invited some friends over and watched television, different channels during the night. And after a few hours, we understood that something was fishy with this coup. That something is wrong. One of the older guys, my uncle, Turkish uncle, he said that, you know, I experienced several Turkish coups. This is not a coup. I know what a coup looked like. And then for me as a researcher and as a journalist, previous journalist, I immediately thought that I cannot just leave this story behind. We have to go into it and try to find out what happened here. And this is the first and foremost important, hunch that you have to follow when you are a journalist or when you want to do real documentary filmmaking. If you are stumbling on a story like this, or if you are just something is happening around you and you feel this is important for what is going on, you just have to start working on it. You cannot just leave it. I mean, this is in a way our obligation as journalists in the world, as people working for human rights, as people working to try to document what is going on, either in writing or in filmmaking. So I decided quite immediately in a way to start working on it. But the thing is that the whole arrangement of this coup attempt was so well organized and chaotic. So for me, the first year, I didn't get any sense of anything. No one knew very much. No one could talk. There are already imprisoned tens of thousands of people, and it was hard. It took a while before I could start getting into the material and starting, putting something together. Mm-hmm. So I think after 1 year, I got my first real interview, and then we started working on the story, you can say. And my way into it, of course, through my family. It is also true that I have been working as a journalist first, and then I went into university where I've been a professor in gender studies, working very much on gender equality issues. Before I started more and more working with filmmaking, the sort of the journalist or the activist in me grabbed me and brought me into the world of art and filmmaking. And especially then documentary filmmaking, because I think that's a very, very strong and important voice in over time. So for me now, I'm working mostly on filmmaking and documentaries from different places of the earth. And we have been making films from Indonesia, Bangladesh, Turkey, Ghana, Egypt, Europe, Norway. Yeah, we have been a lot around and worked with difficult topics. We made a trilogy on Islam and gender with very, very heavy topics, where also several of the people we have been working with have been in prison, and some of them have also been shot dead late after we have met them. So working also with these important human rights issues and democratic topics in the world is it's also taking some chances, you have to say. I can say more about this later on. I would like to add that when we finished the film after some years and launched it in 2019, we had a screening in Oslo. The largest cinema was full. But we also at that time had some people, Erdogan supporters, that was there, and it almost brought into a big fight in the cinema after screening the film. Because this is also part of making critical films, that you have to be aware of what you are doing. And of course, we had already contacted the secret police and the police, so we were sure that we had police around when we screened it. I'm sorry to tell that after the film, the Turkish ambassador in Norway approached us, me and my wife, and told us that from now on, we are considered the enemy of the state of Turkey. So after making the film and after 2019, I have never been back to Turkey, and I cannot go back yet. And now, after Erdogan won, I hoped, of course, that Kilic would win the election, and then it would be possible to go back. But after Erdogan won the election, I'm not sure if that is possible again, to see this beautiful, beautiful and important country in the world again.
Well, yeah, after the elections, as you mentioned, the democracy and human rights is quite a promise in peril at this stage, at least for Turkey. But thank you so much for this wonderful snapshot on your work and the gift from God. And I'm a human rights defender, particularly working on civil and political rights violations. And our reporting is more on paperwork. We work around numbers. Yes, we do have interviews with victims of human rights crimes, violations, and etc. But to disseminate them and to raise a global awareness on what's going on, doesn't matter. Turkey was just a case study here, but any other country where systemic state-led violations are happening, we do need such independent, trustworthy visual documentations as well. This is way more impactful to disseminate the crimes of humanity taking place in different parts of the world. So thank you so much for this great work, and we're going to be back to you with more questions shortly. Mehmet?
Well, thanks so much, Cemre. We have two wonderful producers and directors with us, Firdoze Bulbulia and Faith Isiakpere. But before I pose my questions to them, we have another trailer, a documentary that gives us a glimpse about the stories untold, stories unseen, and stories forgotten about the refugees from all over the world. Let's watch this 2-minute trailer, then we will continue with our interview.
My name is Emmanuel Malish Taban. I'm a migrant. I'm a refugee from South Sudan.
I came to study in South Africa.
Came to South Africa in 1995 with absolutely nothing.
You can call me an economic refugee if you want.
And I'm a proud refugee.
I came to South Africa in search of an opportunity.
I was just escaping from torture, from injustice, and from war.
Take me back to my homeland. Take me back to where I come from. Take me back to my homeland. Take me back to where I
Before my question, I have to tell you that this is not the official trailer of the documentary. It was 6 minutes. We have to edit it to make it 2 minutes. So just wanted to note that. So Firdoze, being an international producer, media solutions, creating media solutions for women and children, and is the chairperson of the Children and Broadcasting Foundation for Africa, could you please tell us more about how your career started? We shared this trailer of the Homeland documentary with our participants. We would be grateful if you could talk about how this production started and the impact it did and it will to raise awareness of the challenges that refugees are encountering.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. So I think to start off with, I was a student activist, and as a high school student, 17 years old, I was detained by the apartheid government, so I went to jail. And my work has always been about activism. It was always been about fighting the system and trying to make sure that the voices of the voiceless will be heard. So for me, as a Black South African, so I'm Indian, I'm of Indian descent, and in South Africa, you have Indian, colored, African, Black African, and white people. As Indians, we only make up 2% of the population, but we have a very strong voice because there's activism that comes all the way from Mahatma Gandhi when he was in South Africa. So the activism, I really believe, is in my vein, it's in my DNA, it's who I am. And so the work that I do has always been in a creative way to tell the stories, to fight the injustice, to use performance, to use art to do this. We were asked by the Turquoise Harmony Institute to really just do, they had the song Homeland, and they wanted to do a kind of a video, which was just, like a 2-minute video of the song. But when we listened to the song, we realized that there's a bigger story to tell. And the story really is about the people, the refugees, the migrants. And it's not only a story for Africa, but it is indeed a global story. And so when we started interviewing the different characters, we realized that this could not be a 2 or 5 minute video, music video, which is what it was originally going to be, but really that we needed to use the story to expose the ills around refugees. Now, we know that the issue of refugees goes back for many, many decades. It's not something that's topical. It didn't just happen the other day. But the song itself was written by Neil Solomon during the pandemic. I think he was really looking curiously at his own life. He is a white South African who, in fact, is Lebanese. And he has never been to Lebanon. He's 70 years old, but he's never really looked at his homeland, at who he is and where he comes from. And I think somehow one morning when he woke up and thought about this, that was how the song started, the words, the lyrics about take me back to my homeland. So if we talk about myself as an activist, it was important to tell that story of a white man living in South Africa who actually has his roots quite somewhere else. And in fact, is not white in the true sense of being white, he's Lebanese. So it was an interesting way for me in, but then also to bring in the creative artists, to bring in the people like Yvonne Chaka Chaka and Sipho Hotsticks Mabuza, who are big names in South Africa, big names on the African continent, and to leverage them and their story, their singing, their power in taking the story further. And then you see the Dr. Taban, Emmanuel Taban, that we talked to. He was a refugee. He actually walked from Sudan to South Africa as a young student. He wanted to study and ended up in South Africa, where he studied from high school into becoming a medical doctor. And during the pandemic, he was quite celebrated because he found a way of helping to actually get all that mucus out of people by using a fine kind of straw that pulled out the mucus. And he saved many, many, many lives in Africa, in South Africa in particular. So his story was really quite an anchor story in terms of the issue around refugees, to show you that refugees, when they come to your country, can bring a lot of wealth in knowledge, in understanding, in so many other ways, which I think local people don't really recognize and they don't appreciate.
Well, thank you so much, Firdoze. I think that your last statement about refugees, that really contributes a lot to the host country with economic and social and many other contributions to the host community. And also we have been discussing about journalism and media, and I think your activism to give a voice to the voiceless, talking about their stories and to tell their stories and using media and journalism. I think this is very important, and this is really what we would like to discuss in this session. And we thank you so much for your remarks. Now, I would like to go to Faith. Faith, you are a media professional working in various international broadcasting outlets, including BBC, directed many films and authored books. Please tell us how you started your journey to tell stories and raise awareness of human rights violations. And please also tell us about the process that took Homeland, a Song for Refugees documentary to the Cannes Film Festival. We are very excited to hear about this.
Thank you very much. Basically, I was born in Nigeria and brought up in the UK. And so from an early age, I knew who I was. That is an African. And what I also realized growing up in the UK is that people know very little about who I am, my culture, my African culture, and my African, what I was brought up with. And so growing up in the UK was very important for me to be an African, so that I know that as an African, our stories always be told by other people, a lot of the time by Europeans. And so when, as a very youngster growing up in London, I said, I want to be part of that generation who are trying to tell the African story from the African perspective. And so that's how from 1975, when I started working in the media, up until today, my storytellings have always revolved around an African perspective. And so when we started to work on Homeland, it was very important. And the amazing thing is that when we actually went to the studio and started to introduce ourselves to the musicians, the amazing thing was that we knew all the musicians, and the musicians also knew us, because they're people that one have worked with for the last 30 years. And so when we started to talk to them about the plight of refugees on the continent, you know, it was very clear to us that we're not going to just do a music video, that we're going to make a film, you know, about us as African, talking about a problem that's been going on for decades. And so for me, as a storyteller, it's just a continuation of something that started 40 years ago, and that is telling the African story from the African perspective.
And also, can you tell about how this documentary went to the Cannes Film Festival, that process?
Firdoze, would you like to answer that?
Sure. Okay, so we thought that it would be important to take the film to one of the foremost festivals in the world. And there is a side event that's called the African Pavilion. And we took it there because we thought that's the right place for the film to be seen by Pan-Africans, so that we make sure that we create a space where the story is told, and it is told to the people who it best suits. But if you're in Cannes, you kind of have a spotlight, a global spotlight on the content that is being shown there. So that was really how we pushed. We spoke to Turquoise Harmony Institute, and we said that it's important for us to actually show the film there. And then, more importantly, was we managed to bring the songwriter, Neil Solomon, and also one of the stories based on a woman who died, a Turkish woman who died whilst trying to get through to Germany. And her husband was able to attend the screening. And that was really important. And what we did then was also have a Q&A so that we could discuss the issue with the audience. And the film has since been accepted in several other festivals, because I think people have realized that the spotlight is important. We need to have this conversation. So we hope to be taking the film to the US, to Toronto, and to, more importantly for us, is to take it to other African film festivals.
Yeah, great. I think it is great to have a global visibility for the documentary, but more importantly, on the plight of the refugees. And, you know, Faith, when you talked about, you know, refugees and your story to the UK, I think when we go back maybe 3-4 generations, we are all refugees. For example, my family, they were refugees from Greece to Turkey, maybe 3-4 generations ago. So these are our stories, and it's great to reveal these stories through, you know, documentary and filmmaking. Thank you so much. And now I'm giving it over to Cemre.
Thank you so much to Faith and Firdoze for their responses. And again, congratulations on getting your wonderful work to a global arena. So let's move on to discuss more practical engagements while working on these productions. And I would love to start with Jorgen. So while covering conflict-related issues, and you mentioned various countries, Turkey was only on the spotlight because of your recent documentary, but how do you work with the victims who shared their stories with you? Particularly, you're speaking with families whose sons are lynched soldiers on the bridges. You spoke with purged officials, high-ranking soldiers, NATO officials indeed. And despite the challenges, you managed to find people to talk inside of Turkey too, because under these circumstances, we do see that, we do report that there's a witch hunt going on as a part of a social purge. So getting people, convincing them to be a part of such an impactful work that will be always out there, accessible, visible, must be quite hard. So I would love to hear more from you in this. How did you manage to get these interviews? And you quite briefly mentioned, but did you find yourself in any other difficult situation, either in Turkey while doing your reportings or outside abroad, right after when your production was out there for audiences to view and watch?
Yeah, this is important questions and very important for everybody to reflect upon. First of all, when you do critical journalism or filmmaking, documentary filmmaking, you have to be very, very sure about your ethics and your concern about two groups. One is the group of people that you will interview and will be part of the film. The other group is, of course, your staff, the group that is working with you, your photographer. If you have a sound man, if you have other people, you have to go through with them and discuss with them and tell them what kind of film we are making and what kind of film we want to make. And that means you have to be very, very clear about safety and ethics when you work on critical matters. Mm-hmm. And for us, we were working with a very small team. And I would recommend everybody to work with small teams if they work with critical documentary filmmaking. So basically, we were me and my wife often was also there because I only understand a little bit of Turkish, so she speaks Turkish, of course. And then our photographer that we have been working with for 10 to 15 years. So basically, it was two of us or three of us that was working together, going for the interviews and being with the people. This makes it also easier to get in contact with people. It's not like a big staff there with you. You're only a small group, easy to get to know and trust. And you have to be sure that the first thing you're thinking about when you're making an interview with them is that they can see the material. You will not use any material that they don't allow you to use or say, yes, this is fine. And it's very, very important that you from day one make them sign the appearance release, because sometimes it can be very difficult to come back to people. Like when I did the filming in Turkey, I didn't never know if I could come back again, you know? Mm-hmm. So when we went to Turkey, we had to be sure that we got all the material we needed with these people that we interviewed, because we couldn't know if we could come back. And be sure that you have the appearance release with you so they can sign it and you have the possibility to use the material. And an important thing when you're interviewing or meeting these people, they will take a chance and you have to ask them. And most of the time, people if they live in a situation like the Tekin family that have lost their son in the lynching on the bridge of the Bosphorus Bridge, I still call it the Bosphorus Bridge, and I will forever call it the Bosphorus Bridge. You know, they want to bring the story out. You know, they want to be open and outspoken because they feel that what they have experienced with their son is so huge injustice. So they have gone beyond fear in a way, you know. And if they say that we want to talk about this, we want to get this out, then it is important also that you trust them and believe in them and respect that, and not really say that, but what you are saying, perhaps you can be put in prison because you are saying that, so I will not bring it. That is not your obligation. Your obligation is to bring that voice out, you know, if they want to take that risk and if they are open with it. As you see, some of the people here are not open. And that is the second thing that you will discuss with the people that you interview. If they don't want to be open, it's always ways to film it in a nice way. Do the interview in a good way. Be sure that the sound is very good, of course, and clear. And then you can put them in different situations where you can make them anonymous and change a little bit with their voices and stuff like that. And it's no problem at all. And of course, the soldiers and the officers were mostly at risk, because I don't know how much you know about the coup attempt and the story here, but what was out in the media was that he was after the Gulenist, that the Gulenist and people belonging to Fethullah Gulen, which is a imam, speaker, leader of a group of people. He said that they were the people planning this coup, and he was basically after them. But this is a shadow story. Basically, he was after taking out the NATO officers, or the officers that was trained and Western oriented, and replace them with Eastern oriented, more Russia friendly officers in the army. That was his main cause. So of course the officers and the military people were mostly at risk, and they are the people that we also filmed incognito or made anonymous when we worked with them. Just to fill out a little bit about how to find people. As I said, it took me years to find people, and you have to have some patience when you're working on difficult issues. That is the way it is. So first, of course, I knew that he was after two groups, NATO officers and Gulen people. So I started contacting people I know in Norway, in Turkey, and then, you know, getting trust with people that you self-trust. And this is very important also. You cannot go to anybody, because they can, of course, give you wrong people or give you wrong information. So you have to talk with people that you really trust yourself, and you know they are trustworthy, and you know they're telling you the truth. So I worked through them, and then you're getting another contact, and then a new contact, and this is the way it works. And after a while, you find this is the person I want to have in the film. This is the person who can talk, who can give me a story. That is that story I want to tell in the film. So many of several of the people that we interviewed actually was interviewed only the 6 last months of the research project process, because then we started opening up and getting people to start talking to us. And of course, when it was a couple of years after the coup attempt, more people wanted to talk and speak to you. I would like to add, can I add just one general thing? Since a lot of people here that want to make critical journalism and also perhaps go into filmmaking. We are in a world that is increasingly authoritarian. Between 60 and 70% of the people in the world are now living in an under authoritarian regime. And what we see is that more and more countries are establishing these authoritarian regimes, and it seems like it's difficult to get rid of them when you first have them there. So what you want to do, the way you want to work, it's so important for the world. And we have to learn from each other. We have to work with each other more and more, I think, in the international community of journalism, and support each other. Several of the journalists that have been imprisoned in Turkey, we work, a lot of others work closely with them all the time with solidarity, and push the state, push the politicians, push the regime to get them out. And sometimes, you know, you will succeed. Sometimes you don't succeed, but sometimes you really succeed. And this is the way we have to work together to support each other and strengthen each other. And we are living in a time when we have to take chances. This is it. We just have to be daring We have to be tough. And I'm really happy that I can be here and speak with you, and I'm very open to have dialogues with you whenever.
Thank you so much, Jorgen. I think this was very important that you underlined. Particularly, I believe more responsibility is falling on our shoulders. The dissidents, brave journalists living in exile, or human rights defenders outside of these oppressed nations, because freedom do have a high cost. Some people are paying it with their lives, you know, getting into corrupt boats, scrambling boats and trying to get overseas oceans, Mediterranean Sea, and get drowned, like Faith and Firdoze's work is reflecting on. So we do have to take our chances, just like you said, and there's a big trade-off in this work. It's never one-time shot. Just like your work, 2 hours, human rights monitoring, reporting, it's a long-term job that we sometimes do get results in the short run, but erosion of democracy is nothing one night. The failed coup attempt, seemingly like a one-night incident, but as you also talk in depth in your work, it took years to build up to the point where that night came in and we saw the biggest hit. So just like that, the reverse processes is going to take time too, with a big trade-off.
Can I just add one thing that I think is important?
Sure.
When you make a story, even if it's a written story or if it's a documentary film, be sure not to put anything there which you cannot guarantee is the fully truth. That is very important. You know, we have got a lot of hate mails because of the film from Turkish trolls, but they have never been able to put the finger on anything in the film that is wrong. You know, they said that, oh, you are traitors, you are terrorist, you are Gulenist, you are whatever. You know, they say all these things, but they cannot put the finger to anything that is wrong in the film. And that is what I'm so happy for, you know, because I have a lot of other material that I researched, but I couldn't guarantee the full truth of it. Like
accountability is very much important in this
and then
sense.
I didn't put it in the film. You know, I was very near to interview the wife of the pilot that bombed the parliament in Turkey. And I had that story very, very close to the truth, but since I couldn't cover the whole of it, I couldn't put it in, even if it is a very strong moment and a very, very strong part of the coup attempt, you can say.
Sure, so partial information is quite, have the possibility to lead misinformation or disinformation, so that's very important. So turning to Faith and Firdoze, in your documentary work, in many other social affairs that you also covered in your documentary work, you do meet with people, particularly for the Homeland documentary. You engage with refugees who are forcibly displaced, who are left in no conditions but forced to leave their homelands under life-threatening situations. And even though they're relocated in safer places, people are still hesitant to share their stories. They are worried about loved ones back at home. So I would like to have your reflections on what sort of professional strategies that you took approaching people in such plighted conditions, engage them in your work. What were the challenges, or were people that you communicated among your communities were brave enough to go ahead and collaborate with you? Firdoze, would you like to start off?
Yeah, sure. I want to, before I say that, I just want to remind people, because the chairperson of the Children and Broadcasting Foundation for Africa, we have a charter on children's broadcasting. And I think Article 4 is not only just for children, people who are producing children's content, but generally for all of us. We say that children should hear, see, and express themselves, their languages, their life's experiences through the electronic media that reaffirms their sense of self, community, and place. And this is really important in all the work that we do. So even if I'm interviewing so-called refugees, I have to make sure that they are comfortable with their story, that what we share, which is what Jorgen is saying, is that there is honesty, there is accountability, there is authenticity, that we are giving the point of view of the person whom we are talking to and not our point of view. And so with the people with Homeland, I think we were lucky in that in the South African context, it was okay to speak to many of the people whom we spoke to. But what we did do, because I am South African, is also to talk about the issue of xenophobia. If you know, we suffered very recently with xenophobia in our country. So for me to speak to refugees, to speak to migrants who are not South African, and to give them the opportunity to share what they feel, their fears, their concerns, the myths and disinformation as they sit in my country. And how do I, as a South African, accept that? How do I allow that voice? Because it's very easy for me to say, oh, no, you don't understand us. But I have to open up. I have to be open to the voices of all the people and their experiences. And I think that was very interesting for me, because if you watch the entire documentary, you will hear many of the refugees are complaining about the way that South Africa has treated Africans in South Africa. So this conversation is an important one. And as I said, it borders on xenophobia. So what does that mean? In terms of protection, because people in my country feel quite affirmed, thank goodness we are in a democracy. So as much as people might complain about the new South Africa, on other levels of corruption, etc., there is still freedom of speech. There is still an opportunity to talk. There is still freedom of movement. So I can sit in a space and I can talk to my peers. I can talk to people like Yvonne Chaka Chaka, who's this amazing musician, and she will talk about xenophobia. And she will, because she has such a strong voice, is able, as Isipo, Hotsticks Mabuza, they're able to question and to challenge other people, other South Africans for that matter. So I think we had a wonderful opportunity because it was a sharing of the platform and allowing the different voices to be heard. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Well, you also pointed out, but there is a very some concerning decrease of freedom on the net as citizen journalists ourselves too. So we have to be cautious about what sort of information we do consume, but relatively the declining media freedom challenges we do experience in many parts of the world. But just like you said, sometimes we are living in relatively better and safer countries, which we must pay the price, so to say, by being brave being on the front. Of course, this is a professional choice, but we are here to support anybody who is leading such works. Faith, anything you want to add in this question?
Yes, I think it's very important because I made my introduction by talking about telling the African story. And what you will find in our films is that when you tell your story, it's got to be a story that's from the heart. Mm-hmm. And we cannot tell our stories unless our subjects, believe in us and they trust us. And they trust us implicitly. Because a lot of the time you are going into their lives and they're going to tell you things that they haven't opened up to anybody before. And for them to be able to do that, they have to trust us as the storytellers, and they feel very comfortable with us. And some of that has changed our lives. Let me give you a very good example. You know, Firdoze and I traveled all over the continent about 20 years ago during the height of the AIDS pandemic. And we did a series on HIV/AIDS on the continent. And it's a series that took a lot of time before we find the people and also do the research, and for them to also trust us to tell their stories. On two instances which will forever change our lives is that one instance on a lady in Ghana who came out and wanted to tell her story to us. We worked with her for a long time, and because of the phobia of HIV/AIDS during that time, the family were too afraid that she's going to bring the family's life into the open. And the daughter killed her. So as a storyteller, I'm going to have to live for the rest of my life with something like that, whereby somebody had so much trust in us that they want to tell our story, but the fear that the family was feeling, cost her life. And so that is what I'm saying, that as storytellers, specifically African storytelling, we have a great responsibility to the people who are telling the stories to us. Because one thing that they know with us is that if we don't feel them, we cannot use them. And so we always say that we want to feel you. Okay, it's nothing from your head, it is from your heart. We want to feel your heart. And so when given opportunity to tell your story as an African, make sure that you open your heart to your fellow African, because they can feel you. And when they start to feel you, then your story will be understood by everybody, on the continent. So that is a very, very important point that I want to make, that as storytellers, we can only tell story because our subjects, believe in us. And I think that's very, very important.
Thank you so much, Faith, for these important examples, incidents too, because we as human rights defenders, investigative journalists, we are actually going through a secondary trauma, right? Listening to all these stories, being the first-hand victims of the plight that these families are going through, even in their relocated safer new homes, new resettlements. So it's quite hard to disassociate ourselves from the stories that we cover or reports that we write, even though this is a professional job that we take. There are some instances where I think for our own mental health too, seeking help is very much important, and we have to be surrounded by organizations, by colleagues who are supporting us, our well-being, working in these conflict zones. Well, we do have a couple more questions for you, but seeing that the discussion is quite vibrant and we have 30 minutes left, I would like to turn to the audience and start getting their inputs, feedbacks. And colleagues, it's really helpful. Even if you don't have a question but would like to take the floor, please write it in the chat so I have a line of questions and intervention requests coming along. So let's start with Remedy, if you're available to unmute yourself to ask your question, share your feedbacks. I can also read out your question if Remedy is still with us. Okay. I guess he's not available to unmute, but I'll continue and read out the question. Anytime later, please unmute yourself. This may seem elementary, but how do you structure your story whenever you put pen to paper? How has storytelling evolved from where you met it and how it's been? So anybody who would like to start first, because you're both perfectly experienced to address this question.
I can start. It's a huge question, and it's the main question. I remember when in my first years of classes in university, I had a professor that said, "So how do you tell a story? A story has a beginning and an end, and within the beginning and the end, you can go first, you go up and you feel happiness, and then you go down and sadness, and then up again, little bit of happiness, and then more sadness, and then you can end the story with happiness, or you can end the story with sadness. You know, you can tell the story in so many ways between the beginning and the ending. So it's hard to really answer it. So how do we do it? We have a plan. Of course, you have a plan when you are going out there and starting making a documentary. But that is the most exciting thing with a documentary. It changes on the way. Suddenly something new is coming up. Suddenly someone is telling you something that you didn't know. Suddenly a new person is coming with a different story, and it changes during the way. So you never know how the story will be before you start editing the film. And when you're editing the film, you see that you can tell the story in many different ways, even though you're in the editing process. And perhaps you have a rough cut, and then you bring the rough cut to some of the experts in editing in the world, because you will have some consultant and people coming in. And I say, no, you have to start with that part. You know, that is the strongest part. Start there. You know, and then suddenly you re-edited it, and you put that part first, and you get a different story, and perhaps a stronger story. So don't think that you have one way of telling a story. There are so many ways of telling a story. The most and wonderful thing with documentary filmmaking is that there are so many stories out there, everywhere. You know, and I got a question now from Africa. I've been traveling a lot to Africa lately with a project there, to Ghana, Uganda, South Africa, and especially Uganda now. There are so many stories to be told. So I think we have to work closely with upcoming voices from the African countries to help them, really give them energy and power and strength to tell these critical and important stories from a huge continent that is not very well known within at least European traditional documentary filmmaking, except South Africa.
I think it's important also for us to realize that as Africans, we can tell our own story, and we don't need others to come and tell our story for us, as Faith said.
Of course.
And there is a huge challenge around what that means, because there is an assumption that there is a European or a Western way of telling a story. The oral tradition comes from Africa. Africans know how to tell their story. And it's also a way in which stories are told. So when you say, how do you write it? I think Faith was very clear about something that comes from the heart. It's something that impacts you because it's your people. It's your story. And so we have a challenge as a company when others come in to tell our story. And, you know, when we did, for example, the HIV/AIDS series, by the time we were going into these different countries in Africa, Western journalists had been in there already. And as somebody called it, you know, it was AIDS porn. It was like, go in there, push your camera, find these people that are dying, show how this continent is doing. And they did exactly the same with the pandemic. There was a perception that all Africans are going to die and look at what's going to happen to them. And yet with the pandemic, Africa did extremely well in dealing with the pandemic. So I think we have to really be careful about how we tell the story and whose story we are telling. And your question is not the person who asked the question around how do you write that story. It's almost fundamental in the way that we learn about storytelling. But I think it's also that you need to know for yourself what story you want to tell. Whose story do you want to tell? Who is the subject? Who is most important? These are really important aspects of storytelling. I'll hand over to Faith.
I think what is important to me is that storytelling is an art form. Okay, and as African storyteller, you know, we have great ways of telling our stories. Okay, so as a filmmaker, you know, I graduated from film school in the UK. So I know the art of storytelling, you know, and my background is theatre, Okay, I know the art of storytelling. So as an African, when people, which is very condescending sometimes, is it when a Western audience see my films, they say, but that's not African. Because, you know, the art of storytelling must also continue to be there in which whatever you make, whether it's a drama or a documentary, you know. So I think it's very, very important that even when you watch Homeland, okay, you will see faith and faith mise en scène within that film. So whether it's something I did this year or something that I did nearly 40 years ago when I did a film on the South African musician Mary Makeba, okay, you will see the art of storytelling by faith. And that is, and that art, you know, for me as an African storyteller, the art must include the heart of the story. You know, because too many people have told my story, have told the African story for too long. And there's one thing that I believe in, you know, very much, that as an African storyteller, okay, the heart is always there. The other thing, which is the art side, whether it's the camera work or is the editing or is the cinematography, you know, I went to film school to get trained in all that. And so for me, I know what I want to shoot before I point the camera, because that was my training. I started in this industry as an editor. So I shoot anything I do, whether it's a feature film or a documentary, I will shoot the sequence already worked out in my head. Because as an African storyteller, one is also an artist. And the art should be part of your mise en scène when you're telling the story. But for me, storytelling, the heart of the story must be African. And that's very, very important for me.
Thank you so much. I think telling this story from the heart, having this emotional, intellectual strength as the foundational venue to start is one of the important, most important takeaways from today's discussion. Thank you so much. So let's move on with Anna. I think we particularly covered this question in some context, but still I want her to raise the question, and that would be great if we can maybe concise our responses a little bit in shorter times, because we have flow of questions coming in. Please go ahead, Anna.
Hi there. So yeah, I had a question for Jorgen, but I think he covered it really well in his answer earlier to you. So would it be okay if I ask another question I put in the chat?
Sure. I did not see them, but that'd be great if you can have it all together.
Yeah, thank you. So I have a question for Firdoze and Faith. So I would like to ask what kind of reactions did you receive from audiences for the documentary film, and how do you feel about the film's impact and its role as spreading awareness about refugees and South Africa?
I want to start with that because we started, it was very important for us that as an African storyteller, we started from the premise where we do believe that as an African, there shouldn't be refugees in Africa. Okay, I've always said to people, you don't know how important it is to be an African until you actually live outside the continent. So when I was brought up in London from the age of 11, I know what Africa is and what it's like to be an African. So even within a refugee, if you see the whole story, you will also, there'll be areas when we talk about why do we have refugees on the continent? Africa is my home, and nobody's going to tell me where to live on this continent, because today I'm in South Africa, so I'm South African. My African village, which is my birthplace, is Nigerian. Okay, if next month I'm in Egypt, I'm Egyptian. If the next month I'm in Kenya, I'm in Kenya. Because when I was living in London as an 11-year-old, walking the streets of London, they never saw faith. What they saw is an African. So from the age of 11, I've always said, I am an African and African is my home. And I don't believe, there should be refugees on the continent because we are all brothers and sisters. And so that is one big aspect of the documentary that we spend a lot of time talking about. And we were very overwhelmed when a lot of the subject matter felt the same way as we did.
Thank you. Firdoze?
Yeah, I think yes, we had a very good response. Thanks, Anna. We had a good response to the film, and we've been showing it in different spaces, and both in South Africa and outside. And as I said earlier, we will show it in other festivals. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So, Jorgen, we have one question from Daisy to you, and you briefly wrote an answer here in the chat, but that would be great if she can read her question once again so everybody in the room hears your response as well. Daisy, are you available to unmute yourself?
Hi, my name is Daisy from Kenya, and I was asking Jorgen about does he have fictional stories, and will it be morally wrong to make up a story? But I've seen him; he had already gotten back to me on inbox chat here.
Jorgen, would you like to go ahead with that?
I can do it very shortly. A fiction, as I said, fiction is a very, very different thing. And of course, in fiction, you can do whatever you want to in a way, that is the art of fiction. It's free. And sometimes in countries where they're very, very hard to make truthful articles in the newspapers or make documentaries because they will not screen, and it will be very hard to make them because of the regime and the way the regime works. Fiction can be a very good way of telling the stories in allegories, because that was the first way they started to make political novels in a way. That was through allegories, and they put the story on the moon or in different islands around the world, and it was a total allegory of England or whatever they wanted to criticize. So go ahead, write fiction. Fiction is wonderful and fun to read and watch, of course, but it's two very, very different things, and you have to be aware that if you do fiction films, it's a total different way of making a film. Here, I think we are talking about journalism and documentary filmmaking.
Yeah, Mirna has definitely a wonderful way to say put out stories in a different style. Mirna, are you available to unmute yourself if you wanna read out your follow-up? Yes.
Okay, I will read it again, though Mr. Jorgen has already answered it. So, since conveying that solidarity isn't easy, as it won't be accepted by the society or even some higher-ups who are the bigger political regime, can fiction with a very deep meaning or even drama help to convey the truth or the suffering of some victims in society, be a good alternative? And thank you. Was my question reached?
I'm not sure if it was a question there. Was it basically a comment or?
No, it was a question like, I mean, how much fiction and drama can be a good way to convey the truth?
Yes,
accepted by the society as well.
Yeah, but I think Jorgen has answered that, and we're discussing documentary and journalism.
I think so.
Yes.
So of course we agree with you.
Yes.
Moving on, Eunice has a good question, and I guess working in the youth area, this might be right where Firdoze has an expertise. If I mispronounce, I do apologize. Yunus Myron, are you available to unmute and join our discussion, or I can read out your question? She's saying she's currently working on a documentary about youth political movements in Nigeria, and says, I interviewed a lineup of amazing minds. The documentary is in the edit stage now, but it's taking a turn of its own. Do I follow the story, or do I keep on steering the documentary in the direction of script? Plus, I'm working with a topical limitation and a deadline, so there is that to consider too. Thank you, she says. Firdoze, would you like to address that?
Sure, thank you. I think Jorgen actually answered that earlier when he was explaining that sometimes a documentary it will go off script because it depends on what material you have now. So what you have, and if that is more important, more exciting, more accessible, then that's the material that you use. Your script might just adjust briefly. Obviously, you're not going from telling story A to suddenly being story Z. So it has to be within limits of what the script is. Your script is your guide. Your script is there to make sure that the gist of what you want to say is there. But it could turn out that you interviewed somebody else who gave you a much bigger, better story. And so that is what you would work through. Also keep to deadline, keep to story, in so far as you can be succinct and clear. I think that's always important.
Can I just make a short,
please.
A short comment on that? Because
sure.
You said the filmmaker is doing it in Nigeria?
Yeah, I believe so.
Yes. No, because I'm a Nigerian and we work in Nigeria all the time. We are broadcasters in Nigeria. And I know that 64% of our country are young people. Okay. Mm-hmm. And we have a country of 200 million people. And the youth of Nigeria have so many questions unanswered. And so the only advice I will give this filmmaker is to remember that the young people of Nigeria have 1,000,001 questions unanswered by the leadership. So be truthful to them. Be truthful to the youth, okay? Because they have so many questions that leadership haven't answered during the last 3 decades.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
If you can just add one sentence, because I agree very much with what Faith and Firdoze is saying. For me, you have to be truthful to reality and not to your script. I mean, if reality changes, the film has to change. The script is something you have as an idea of what you're going to do, but if reality change, don't stick to your script. That will be, in a way, cheating yourself when it comes to understanding what's happening in reality out there.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Thank you so much. So moving on, another question we sort of covered, but I would love Tomilayo, if the conditions are okay, to unmute yourself and address your question or share any feedback that you heard from the expert speakers. Hasna has an important question, something that we did not cover yet, but she can raise it if you're available. Hasna, checking my line of speakers. Okay, the question is about starting a podcast. How can I start a podcast that talks about the impact of climate change on human rights, especially since it's forbidden here in Egypt?
I think within the social media space, depending on what is allowed, you can be blocked. So if you are in a country where you are blocked and you can't actually show or get the podcast out, you could probably produce the podcast and send it through in different ways. So you have to find out what is available. And I think that quite a few countries have a way in which you can, clandestinely get content out. I would say, though, make sure, as we're all saying, is that it is authentic, that it is honest, that it is, rooted in democracy and human rights and all the good things that we are talking about.
All right, moving on, I have Henry in line. Are you available to join us?
Yeah, hi there. So I phrased it on the chat as truth is a difficult landscape to navigate. How do you fact check your work? How about when it relates to subjective value judgments? And how can you be sure that you're telling the right story? And I'd like to, and I understand this is sort of these are sort of very, very broad questions, but how do you understand if a source is earnest? I guess all of these sort of things sort of relate to each other. So yeah.
I can give you an example. You know, Faith was talking earlier on about us filming the HIV/AIDS series. We went to Ethiopia, and there was a person who really wanted to tell us her story. She seemed like a trans woman, and she had created in her mind that she was this amazing performer, creative, etc. And she came to us and she said we needed to go with her, which was quite a treacherous road up to where she lived. And on the top of the hill, she had this place that was set up, and she said, you know, she needs to tell the story. As we started talking to her, we did not believe her completely. And we asked her, you know, have you spoken to your neighbors? Does your family know about this? Because remember, HIV was a kind of a taboo thing. People were not talking about it. People didn't want to get, you know, disclose anything. And she said that she hadn't told anybody, but she wanted to speak to us. And what we had to say to her was, once you speak to us as an international group, your story is going to go out.
If you have to try to open up a story to find out what really happened, I think it is important that you... It's nice to see you together, guys.
Yeah, I was going to say that. We were together and didn't let us know.
I thought we were in two different countries or two different spaces or something like that.
A good surprise.
Yeah, that was a good surprise. Yeah, so I think after, I think you will be trained in understanding if this is a truthful story or a truthful voice or not. But you have to check it, and you have to double check and ask others about, is this a truthful story? So be critical. I mean, and be critical to yourself all the time. I'm a very skeptical person, so I always check a lot, and I don't trust people very easily, because you really have to be sure that what you put out there, you can be like, perhaps you can never be 100%, but at least you can be 99% sure that this is the story I want to tell because it's a truthful story.
Well, I guess that's a good standard for your work, so no worries on that. Well, over to you, Faith and Firdoze.
Okay. Yes, I mean the story that Firdoze was telling everybody when she got frozen at is that the thing about this, because of now everybody wants to be a celebrity. Everybody now believes in the hype. Everybody wants their 30 seconds of fame. And so people will make up story. They will reinvent themselves, you know, and you have to know when to feel them, okay? As a storyteller, I mean, if I say to people, if I don't feel you, then I can't use you. It is that simple, because your heart will tell you that you're listening to a genuine story. But there are a lot of people. That's why everybody is doing TikToking, whatever they are, because everybody, you know, wants their 30 seconds of fame. So a lot of them will go to a great length, you know. But as somebody who's been doing it for over 40 years, you know what's the hype, and I don't believe in the hype, you know. And hopefully, experience will tell you that what you're listening to is something that's genuine or it isn't. And as Firdoze was saying, so this woman actually just wanted to be part of what we're doing, and so she invented her own stories, that she think we want to, and that we will want to listen to. And that's not, so for me, if I don't feel it, I can't use it. It is that simple.
Thank you so much. So
Yeah,
lastly,
I would like just to
Yes.
have a comment to Faith, because I
Of
think
course.
this is interesting, because I wouldn't really trust my heart always. Perhaps it's because I'm from the cold north, Faith, or
I'm an African,
I think I would
and
use my mind
we can
first
only
of
do
all.
we can only do
Use
what
your
we feel.
mind, That's where you
As
find it in
Africans,
this
we feel all the time. and I always say to people, as a filmmaker, I have to use my heart, because that is the only thing I feel with. I don't feel with my head, no. I have to use my heart all the time. And for me, that is very, very important.
If it's any consolation, I do both, head and heart.
Yes, I was gonna say that sometimes getting the two ends meet in between is quite challenging, but that's an alternative too. Thank you. So lastly, I'll give the floor to highlight, because he had his hand up before too. Jorgen, quite frankly, covered this, but any feedback that you want to add, or any quick follow-up question?
Thank you. I want to add some reflection. It was very, very interesting. But as Faiz said, that we have to hear or feel our heart, not our head. It's heartbeat, like directly in the soul of others. So as storytelling, as he said, that we Africans, we have a lot of cultural saying, mazes, and a lot of things. But I have one question for Faiz, that African, in the perspective of African storytelling. So what does that mean? I think, is there any out of African interest or something like that, to be or to be clear something here? But Jorgen says a lot of things, but and within South Africa storytelling also, I get a lot of things. Here in Ethiopia, we have 123 million, and civil war also 2 years, these 2 years, and we are facing a lot of things. This is very hard to journalists, even for me, how to cover stories, in which way, and what a lot of human rights are violations, ethnic cleansing here and there, a lot of interest. So I get some points to cover from South Africa. I get more points. Thank you very much.
Yes, over to you, Faith.
I thank the young man. We spent a lot of time in Ethiopia. We love Ethiopia. We filmed many times in Ethiopia, and I think it's I think you still have to, and especially in Ethiopia, is what I find quite incredible is the different cultural thing within one country, and also the different religious belief, within Ethiopia. And so, for me, is that I feel at home when I'm in Ethiopia. I feel at home. It doesn't matter which country I am in on the continent, because I feel very closely to with the people as soon as I was able to spend some time with them. And I will continue to maintain that as Africans, our oral tradition started, with our elders, with our uncles and our parents, as soon as we can walk, as soon as we can talk. And that storytelling, yes, we do it now in a different ways, but that tradition of storytelling is still relevant today. And if you remember, in Ethiopia, you have your coffee ceremony, which is a wonderful way of people opening out to you and telling a story. So you, exactly. So we've used the coffee ceremony in Ethiopia to do a lot of storytelling,
Yes.
And I'm saying use your culture, to get at the stories, and you as a storyteller, make sure you get the heart of those people so that they use you as a window to the rest of the world.
Yeah, to communicate also. It's an hour to, as a culture, neighborhoods and discussion, a lot of people, this is our culture. Yeah, you are perfect saying. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. In Turkish culture too, we do have big ceremonies and serious topics to discuss while having a strong Turkish coffee. Thank you so much for this wonderful example.
In Nigeria, if you're in Nigeria, we have the kola nut ceremony.
Perfect.
Where they break the kola nuts, which is similar to your coffee ceremony in Ethiopia.
Yeah.
Great reflections. Well, before we conclude the session, Mehmet, would you like to share any reminders, follow-ups on the media journalism webinars, to-dos?
Yes, actually, this session has been really wonderful. We talked about storytelling, and of course, documentary filmmaking is one of the ways of making stories. But of course, this time, we would like our participants to have a hands-on experience on an international journalism project, which we shared this document with you. So this is our second week, and we would like this project to come to an end at the end of the 5th session. So we would like you to participate in this hands-on experience, and we would like you to select topics of interest. It could be, like social, economic, political, environmental, any topic of interest. And of course, we would like you to research, and fact-checking is important. So we would like you to use fact-based data and make interviews with people. And this will be published on JWS website and blog. But of course, since we are having partnership with different news media outlets, so we will share it with them. So it might be even published on their website. So we really encourage you to have this, and this article must be original and in-depth, of course. And we would like you to pay attention to media ethics, which our guests, they talked about it. And we would like this not to be very long or not to be very short. So we would like you to stay between 700 to 1500 words limit. And you could do this project by yourself, or maybe 2 or 3 participants may want to work together on a joint project, and then submit this to us. So we have a project outline talking about how you want to put together and how you're going to pitch this project. And so this could be a really good project for you. So we would like you to have your resume in order for us to submit and share this with these different media outlets. And we have pre-reporting, reporting, production, and publication timeline and reference. All this information is already shared with you. So we really highly encourage you to take this option to write a story or a news article and share it with us. And as I mentioned to you, so this will be published on JWF Academy's website under the blog. And if you want, you can go on the Journalism Project to see it. And also it will be published on our JWF Journalism Rights Foundation blog. And we will share this, we will disseminate this within our global partners, 36 global partners from 24 different countries. So you can have a global visibility on your project. Thank you, Cemre.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mehmet. So we have to wrap it up. Alex, if not a question, but very short feedback or reflection. I don't want to disregard it, seeing your hand up, but very shortly. Let's have your reflections too, and then we're going to wrap it up.
Yeah, to be honest, I have a question about project. Yeah, but I also can add something. Yeah, thank you so much for this session. It was really useful, informative, and understand what happens. And yeah, thank you. I have a question about about this project. Am I right that until 14th of July, we can send the project proposal? Am I right? That's
yes.
Only project proposal, and that's enough.
You can share your proposal with us at any time. But of course, we would like you to, finish your project on July 15th. But of course, if you are working in a project that may take a little more time, we can give you more time. But in our previous experiences, if you don't give a deadline, then the project could take a long time and we move on to other things as well. So the end time to submit is July 15th. If you need more time, contact us, let us know.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you, Alex. Well, thank you, Jorgen, Faith, Firdoze. That was a fantastic discussion. Thank you so much for opening your hearts and minds with us, sharing your professional tips, strategies. That was fascinating to hear your years of experience in this particular working area. So, any last goodbyes or any concluding remarks you would like to share with us?
Thank you so much, Cemre, for hosting it and inviting us to participate. This is so important work you are doing, and it's just a huge pleasure to be a part of it and be invited to talk. And good luck to all the students for their work, for the papers, and for all the wonderful coming films and stories they will make. I look forward to it.
Great insights. Faith, any goodbyes?
Yes,
talk from the heart now, Faith. Talk from the heart.
Thank you. All I'm going to say to young storytellers and filmmakers is have a good heart. If you have a good heart, your story will always be accepted by the majority. And be truthful to that good heart. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I guess Firdoze is no longer available. Oh, yeah, she's here. Sorry, I could not see you there.
I will just share something called People, Peace In, Peace Out. And this was a training I went on in Thailand, where it was around meditation. And for those, especially our friend who is in Ethiopia, talking to us about the challenges, the stress, the trauma, the difficulties, take time, peace in and peace out, so that you really meditate. And when you give yourself 2 minutes, 3 minutes, 5 minutes, just to take time, so there's some kind of mental health, some kind of caring for yourself. And when you do that, hopefully it opens up the world, it opens up the story, it gives you time and gives you more energy. But thank you all for this opportunity to chat to you. And I hope that it has been useful. Thanks to the organizers. Thanks, Jorgen. It was lovely to listen to you. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much, Firdoze, for this important takeaway and reminder. Well, I'll see everybody next Tuesday for our session 3, and we'll continue sharing reminders, information coming up. And Priyanka can also reshare our speakers' social media tags again. And I'm pretty sure they would love to keep the conversation on from different social media platforms as well. So thank you so much. Have a lovely day, everyone. Bye-bye.